right, welcome to the second podcast for 4thandlong. We're excited to be back for a second edition. The first one loaded up, no problems. We had a few views, so we're excited to bring you that. And as always, moving forward, you're going to have myself, Brian, Commissioner of the League, Screaming Beavers. And as always, I have to have somebody on the other line to talk to me, otherwise this is just weird. But we got Jägermeister's Randy in the building again. Randy, how you doing?
How about them Cowboys?
Well, we'll get to that, won't we? But yeah, it was an interesting Sunday night to say the least. So we'll go from there and we'll get right into it. How does that sound?
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, so as always, we like to start off with the week that was, and we're looking at the best matchup that we each thought took place last week. So, Randy, why don't you, since you're the guest of honor, why don't you start us off?
Sure. I think the matchup, even though I didn't type it up this week, I typed up a different game. I actually chose Screaming Beavers and Global Warming, which I talked about last week. I chose that as actually the best game for a couple reasons. I mean, it was reasonably close and it was high scoring. There were 5 players between the two teams with 20 or more points, which is always nice to see. That's usually, other than the quarterbacks, that's a good benchmark for a really good game. And only 7 players with less than 10, and I think half of those had 9. So it's pretty much everybody showed up to play on both teams. And I guess just an honorable mention to the Texas Walker Rangers versus Dirty Old Bastards, which I typed up in my matchup of the week there yesterday morning. So yeah, that was my pick for that. It was nice, high scoring, and close, which is usually a good choice for a good game to watch.
Yeah, well, being a part of that, it was nerve-wracking to say the least throughout it. Started off as if I was not going to even come close. Ryan and I were texting back and forward, and then all of a sudden the afternoon game played where the Rams took off, and thankfully Gurley did what he's done for me last year. He started to do it again this year so far, but just wasn't enough to get through global warming. 4-point difference. And I think it's because I cursed Matt Stafford as bust of the week last week. He came back to throw a touchdown in the final couple minutes to put global warming ahead and kind of secure the win there. But it definitely was an interesting matchup. Again, 2 high-scoring teams going at it. But unfortunately, I'm 0-2 now, and global warming got his first win of the year. So congrats to him. And we'll see what transpires moving forward. But that's an interesting choice for matchup of the week. Now, you did an honorable mention just now, and they were actually my matchup of the week, which was Old Dirty Bastards and Texas Walker. Interesting note: Old Dirty Bastards was actually in the worst game of the week last week, and now they're in the best game. So their season has definitely turned around from last year. They're 2-0, sitting 3rd in our league. So Jake's got to be happy there. The reason I took that was there was about a 17-point difference. Now, if you look at what Texas Walker had on the bench, he could have picked any one of his 2 quarterbacks, and he would have ended up winning this matchup.
Exactly.
So he and you can't go wrong with Rodgers. It's just Minnesota played good, and the other quarterbacks, those points, any one of them, like I say, could have totally turned this around. And that's why I think they were pretty balanced throughout their rosters. I mean, both wide receivers put up the numbers they should have. The running backs were pretty respected. Their flex positions were pretty much bang on. Old Dirty had some issues with Carlson in Minnesota missing some kicks, and so it was all around pretty close. I think just again that quarterback decision. Again, you can't fault Texas for playing Rodgers. It's just the way it was. But I think that's why it was the matchup of the week for me. Is just a simple roster change could have changed this whole matchup, and they could have been a different story here. So. That's the best. So unfortunately, I'm going to spearhead the worst, and I'm sorry to my co-host here, but I got to put you in the worst game of the week. Clueless versus Jägermeisters. I have won for the worst game of the week for week 2 in our league. An interesting point here, actually, between both teams, not one player had more than 20 points.
Yeah.
So that kind of hurts both rosters to begin with. Nobody's really putting up any fantastic numbers, which means from a team starting perspective, when nobody puts up 20, you can tell the entire roster did not perform. Then you have some interesting points that have come up, or lack of points. Is you got -1 point for Clueless's defense, so minus is never good. And then your tight end put up 0 points. So
Yeah.
so both had roster spots that actually hurt their performance, and both defenses actually. I wrote a note here, and then I'll let you go on. Both defenses for both teams actually allowed 20 plus points. Both quarterbacks threw for less than 300 yards, and between the quarterbacks, only 2 throwing touchdowns were completed. So it was a very interesting matchup to say the least, but point-wise, it was not exciting. And I know you don't like hearing that stuff when you're involved, but for me, that's the worst game of the week in our league was Clueless versus Jägermeisters, and Clueless ended up walking away with the win.
Yeah, well, I, I, I can definitely agree with you on the point of it wasn't a good performance, and certainly not for my guy's part. Would have been a lot better had I not benched Matt Ryan at the last minute, but he had a good game, and I'm confident with him going forward. So I don't think I'll be benching him anytime soon. But yeah, and I also picked up your boy from last year, Jack Doyle, as my tight end. Hopefully he gets more than 2 targets a game. That was pretty disappointing for me. My worst game is actually a bit of an interesting one. It's Shelley told me to versus the bottom feeders. Now, there are 2 layers to the reason why I chose this. The big reason is it was the biggest blowout. So that was the first one. It wasn't even close. You pretty much you take one look at it on like Sunday afternoon. You're like, well, I don't have to look at this anymore. But the other second layer to it was that it actually very much could have been like one of the lowest scoring games you'll see all year, because as you'll notice by looking at this, Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, those were the only 2 players that did anything at all. And if you take away those scores, or you don't even have to take away the scores. If you give them an average day, Patrick Mahomes had 50 plus points, but if you give them an average score, which for a quarterback is about 20 to 25, and because Kelce is one of his receivers, if Mahomes has an average day, then Kelce would have an average day, and if that average is, say, 10 to 12 points, that's 40 points taken off his score. And if you take 40 points off that score, the score looks like 69 to 75, which is a terrible score in any league. So, the other fact, because there's just those 2 players, 90% of the players in this matchup sucked. Which is a similar point to what you made with mine, but it's just the kind of thing that if it weren't for Mahomes just lighting up, and then and then Kelsey's residual effect from that, there wouldn't have been a single player that was doing well here. So that's why I picked the worst.
Yeah,
that game was the worst of the week because it was literally one player away from being a total disaster on both sides.
That's interesting because I was debating between this matchup, actually between them and your matchup, and I think you bring up a good point. I mean, you have a couple roster spots on the bottom feeders that absolutely lit it up, and again, and that's a point I looked at as well. Is you bring them back down to reality, or an average day, we can call it. You are right. That score was pretty close. Now you got to feel for Shelley told me to. I mean, Duke Johnson for 1 point. Njoku for 2 points. Minnesota's defense.
I mentioned that previous that it's too bad Leonard Fournette couldn't play because I'm sure he feels he's very solid at the running back position, but one guy goes down and now you got to rely on Duke Johnson.
Yeah, and again we brought that up last week, was the fact that Fournette was questionable and David Johnson was questionable, but Fournette did not play and Johnson got to play. So it's very interesting. But yeah, you are right. But I can see your thought process on that. But so those are kind of the matchup recaps from last week, best and worst. But we also have to do some players now, as always. So we're going to talk about the player of the week, and I'm just going to start this off, and then I'd like to hear what you have to say. But for me, we're just going to stick with the bottom feeders. His starting quarterback, Patrick Mahomes. I mean, this guy has to be your player of the week in any league, in any talk show, and anything you want. You got it. Mahomes is on your mind. I mean, 50 points in a fantasy week, that's ridiculous.
Well, that is insane.
Like, that's just unheard of. Even like an unreal quarterback outing is usually maybe high 30s to low 40s, but to add on another 10 to that, that's just ridiculous. I mean, the kid set an NFL record with 10 touchdowns in his first game. Now you think of all those quarterbacks who come to your mind on elite status, and this guy has set the record in the first 2 games. Now, it's only 2 games, so maybe we don't get ahead of ourselves.
That's
But
right.
but from a fantasy perspective, I mean, to me, he's the player of the week. I mean, 6 touchdowns in one game with 320 plus yards. This kid does have the arm, and I'm surprised Pittsburgh allowed him to do that. But for him to come through in a battle of that caliber and do what he did, I mean, you got to get that confidence boost if you're Mahomes moving forward. That hey, I can actually do this in this league. So for me, hands down, player of the week, Patrick Mahomes. So congrats to the bottom feeders who took a chance on that kid, and I think it's paying off well for him.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, and like obviously he is my top player too. I'm going to go with my honorable mention just so we can talk about someone else. My honorable mention is actually Todd Gurley.
Oh,
Your
okay.
boy there.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, of course, I think for that week you can kind of call him Mr. Paydirt because I think what did he have, like 73 all-purpose yards? That's it.
Yeah.
And he had 3 touchdowns plus 2 two-point converts for 29 points. He led all non-quarterbacks in this league, so he'd be my honorable mention. But like you said, Patrick Mahomes, 6 touchdowns, 326 yards. I mean, I know Pittsburgh is really missing Shazier there on the defense. But yeah, like you said, for a rookie, his first 2 games to just, especially with a good running game too, he's hitting everybody everywhere, and it's not just one deep ball here or there. Like he's doing it all over the place. It's really impressive.
Yeah, just that's an interesting pick with Gurley. An honorable mention for me actually goes out to Texas Walker. Stephon Diggs for Minnesota. I thought that kid tore it up against Green Bay, against the obviously divisional game, which is very important. I mean, both sides are upset about the tie, but Diggs with 128 yards with 2 touchdowns, plus he was a part of a 2-point conversion. So I mean, it's a tie. You can just take the field goals aside. He doesn't catch that ball. Well, you don't have a tie to go to. So it's another 2-point conversion, and I think you got to be happy with Cousins airing it out, the yardage he's put up so far.
That's right.
To have that type of quarterback and that receiver connection only 2 games into the year, I think there's going to be big things for Diggs and Texas Walker. He's got to be happy. But honorable mention, I'm going to give a shout out to Diggs. I thought he played well this week too. But moving forward, Randy, we got to talk about the bad.
Yeah.
Who just didn't do it for you this week? What was a player out there that let a GM down in the worst way? Who do you got for bust of the week?
Well, I've actually got. It's a pretty tough one. I've got Gronkowski as my bust now. Now, of course, I know they were playing a world class defense in the Jaguars, but only 4 targets for 1.5 points. Surely Brady, would try to get to him more often, especially as they were down. It's not like the Patriots were up and the Jaguars beat them late. Jaguars led for a good portion of that second half, so I was kind of surprised only 4 targets. I kind of thought they'd be more like 7 or 8 targets, but you never know. I didn't watch the entire game. I watched bits of it, but I didn't watch the entire game. Maybe he was covered really well, but yeah, he was a bit of a disappointment for Kelly there, the Devil Raiders.
Yeah, that's where there's got to be something in the air or the water right now, but we're on the same page today because for me the bust of the week is Gronk.
Mm-hmm.
That is a big game, and what I didn't understand is the fact that Jalen Ramsey, we talked about this last week on the podcast, was what he said, because I said this would be a game to watch, right? And what Jalen Ramsey has said, that Gronk is just okay, he's whatever. Well, yeah, Jalen probably didn't stop Gronk the entire, shut him down just by himself, but they shut him down. And they said, like, we're not going to allow you to do what you do. And hats off to Jacksonville. But you're right, like 4 targets for 15 yards. Well, in our league, that's 1.5 points. He's projected for 10. So he did almost a tenth of what he should have done.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at that on an average, sometimes Gronk usually gets about, 50 to 80 yards with 2 touchdowns. That could have changed this whole matchup. I mean, Devil Raiders only lost to Misfits by 12 points. Gronk does what he should do. I mean, this is, this is where those one individuals are starting to kind of sway how these records are going to move forward in fantasy.
Right.
Another bust I had, since, again, you said we shouldn't talk about the same person, for me, I'm sticking with Devil Raiders, and he's got to be upset with what Beckham Jr. did. 5.1 points, 51 yards. That's it. This guy signs a massive contract. They're 0-1 going into Dallas. It's a divisional game where all the hype's there. And yes, we can talk about that O-line maybe on a separate podcast. But the fact of the matter is that this guy should be producing more than what he did. And you gotta feel for Devil Raiders when you got a guy like Gronk and Beckham, who are, we all know, are in the top 5 of their respected positions, collectively putting together 6.6 points.
Yeah,
Like
that's true.
that's just embarrassing. And so I hate to say it, Devil Raiders, Kelly, if you're out there, I feel for you. Um, but your busts of the week are both for me coming off your team. But anyways, that's last week. We have a whole new week ahead of us now, don't we?
That's right.
So,
Especially for you and me, a couple 0-2 guys, Kelly as well 0-2. Let's look forward to next week.
so moving on to next week. Who do you like? What do you got? Matchup of the week. What are you looking forward to? And if you could break that down for us.
I'm looking forward to, well, I guess, obviously, I'm looking forward to my team getting a chance. An 0-2 team against Old Dirty Bastard at 2-0. Right now, I am projected to beat him, so I'm hoping that's the case. My running back advantage seems to be good enough to overcome. I'm certainly hoping for that chance. I'm also going to make a couple more predictions, mostly just that Gronk will bounce back for Kelly, but it's not going to be enough. Texas Walker Rangers are going to beat him, and that's my prediction here. And at least for our league, another little prediction is just regards to the NFL. The Cardinals will score less than 10 points against the Bears, and the Bears will get at least 5 sacks. That's my prediction for the NFL, at least.
Wow, a couple bold predictions already out the gate. I like it.
I'm feeling emboldened by the fact that I was correct in my prediction that the Pittsburgh-Kansas City game would be a shootout, which it very much was, and that I also picked Nigel to beat the Misfits to beat the Devil Raiders, and I'm pretty happy that I was right on both those counts. So I'm emboldened to roll the dice a few more times.
Well, that's good. Yeah, no, your matchup's interesting. I know I had a conference call with the Old Dirty Bastards, and I know he had to make a waiver pickup this week. It's public knowledge now that he had no choice but to grab a kicker, because his kicker got the boot, pun intended. But he grabbed McManus from Denver, and I think that's a smart pick. I think there's a few out there, but I like this pick. But yeah, it should be a good matchup. I agree with you. I mean, you are projected to win by 20, so you do have a little bit of wiggle room to start the day. Unfortunately for Old Dirty Bastards, Freeman is not ready to go, and that'll hurt. But he has a decision to make here, and I'm curious to see what happens come Sunday, because they play at different times. He's got Carson Wentz ready to go, and he's been riding the burger. And I know in our chat group he's praising the burger. So it'd be interesting to see what he does there. I think both are favorable matchups. So it'd be interesting. But your team, your Jägermeisters look pretty good there, and I think that should be a game to watch as well. For me, matchup of the week is Texas Walker versus Devil Raiders. There's only 3 points. There's only 3 points separating the two. And as we all know, we alluded to it earlier, which cost him a game. But Texas has three quarterbacks: Rogers, Cousins, and Bortles. He can only play one. All three actually have favorable matchups. So it'd be interesting to see who he gives the start to. I am going to assume it's Rogers, but you never know. But he's got those options there. And again, like you just stated, I don't think that Devil Raiders busts are going to happen. I also have that note here that I think Gronk and Beckham, they're going to bounce back. Gronk will, and Beckham really has no choice. But the interesting thing here is, Randy, and this is a side note, I'm going to put you on the spot here on the podcast.
Okay.
Speaking of Devil Raiders, question for you. How soon and how well will Josh Gordon fit in the New England system?
I think it will. Yeah, I think it'll take some time. Edelman is back in a couple more games. There was an interesting comment that I had heard. I believe it was Michael Irvin who was interviewed and on TSN there, and I believe he said something to the effect that Bill Belichick is more famous for bringing out the talent in guys than being good dealing with the off-field stuff. So the talent's already there for Josh Gordon. So I don't think it'll be a problem. He got into a couple of snaps last week. I think that snap count will grow. As far as that, I think he'll mostly just be a deep threat kind of guy. He's not going to be very involved in a lot of things right away. And the fact that the Patriots, naturally on offense, other than maybe Gronk or maybe Edelman, they like to spread the ball around a lot and get it to everybody. I think he'll play quite well, and he'll get quite a few snaps. I don't know how much of a fantasy option he'll be right now. It's definitely a wait and see kind of thing to see, how well he practices. Kind of listen to all these guys at the practices and so on, and see what you can get from there. But if it were me, I would wait and see.
Yeah, interesting. A lot of guys refer it to almost the Ocho Cinco kind of deal, because let's face it, Moss is Moss, and that obviously panned out. But it's more to me like the Ocho Cinco. You get a guy who's coming in who obviously has talent, but a lot of baggage too, and just not sure if it's going to work out. And we all know Belichick. If you're not going to work out or buy in right away to the cult that is the Patriots, the door is going to close pretty quickly. So, to me, I think the Cleveland Browns did very good on that trade. Yes, you lose that talent, but you got other guys in your system, and you also picked up a fifth round, where Patriots don't give a shit about a fifth round pick. But for a team like Cleveland, that could be somebody they need to build up into their system. So Gordon had way too many opportunities, and I think it's Cleveland's got to be happy with that. But you never know. Maybe he gets into that system, but time will tell, I suppose. So again, the reason I bring that up is Devil Raiders has him on the roster, so I'd be kind of curious to see when and how Raiders plug him in. So I just thought I'd get your little take on that. But we can, so that's kind of matchups of the week for week 3. But is there any one particular player or honorable mentions you're kind of looking at that we should pay attention to this week?
Well, I'm looking forward to the quarterback matchup of Drew Brees and Matt Ryan. I think I've stated several times in my rankings and so on that the Saints-Falcons rivalry, especially with those two guys at quarterback, has had a history of some real wild games and some real good fourth quarter comebacks, which is almost all quarterback related, at least at that point. I'm looking forward to seeing how these two guys light up, and of course, Matt Ryan being my starter this week, I'm hoping that happens. That is something I'm really looking forward to. I'm looking for those two to continue their high scores. Yeah, that's a big one for me. I'm looking forward to like 300 yards from each of them and a couple touchdowns apiece. Uh, I, I, like I said, I have selfish reasons for liking that, but it's always an entertaining matchup to watch.
It's funny. I put that, and we're going to talk about that a few times here before this podcast closes, actually. So I really don't know what it is today, man. But there's not too often for people who know you and me. We're really on the same page when it comes to sports. So there's something brewing here. But just to lead into that, when you say Matt Ryan, my player of the week to watch, and I think he's due. So look out, is Julio Jones.
Oh.
Again, you alluded to the fact of the shootouts with the quarterback battles with plus 100 yards and everything like that. Well, with Freeman out, who is Matt Ryan really going to depend on now? It's got to be Julio. He's got to have a big day. Saints actually defense, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, they've given up the most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. Yes, it's only 2 games, but this season. So now you have a top 3 wide receiver coming in. Should be interesting. And again, like you say, there's always shootouts there. So look for the aerial attack. But I'm on the same page with you, but I'm just going to go with a different position. So busts of the week, though, Randy. Now you got to praise your little voodoo picks last week, so I'm going to enlighten you on mine for just last week before I get into the bust of the week, if that's okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Last week, for week 2, I predicted a bust of the week was going to be Jimmy Graham, and I said, I bet you he gets 50 yards. You can go back and you listen to the tape. He actually got 43 yards.
There you go.
Which obviously was a bust for that position. Then I said, Tom Brady is actually going to have a difficult matchup against that Jacksonville team because I think the winner of the AFC from going to the Super Bowl is coming out of that matchup. Tom Brady only had 15. I predicted he'd be around 15 fantasy points. He actually had 19. So I felt pretty good with those collective picks. Just to throw a little praise out there, and for those listening, I'm sure I'll get some Facebook comments on that. But for me, Randy, the bust of the week, an interesting one, and we don't talk about this team a lot, is I think Philly's going to wake up here because I think they realize what's on the line moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, I think their defense is going to come to play, and I think T.Y. Hilton is my bust of the week. I just don't think he's projected for 10. Wentz is starting. Philly's fired up. I don't think Hilton's going to get 10 points. So to me, I hate to say it, whoever has him, I'm not really sure. I'd have to double check later, but Hilton is my bust of the week. I don't think he's going to do anything. I don't think Indy's going to do anything to Philly.
Well, like you said, I think everyone in the league, everyone who watches football was shocked by Tampa Bay beating Philly. And like you said, that's just the kind of wake-up call that a good defense like that will push forward, and they will certainly improve. I believe that too. So,
who do you? Anybody you think that's going to let somebody down? And I hope whoever you say is not on the Screaming Beavers.
Well, I think Matt Stafford's going to be and then by extension Golden Tate as well. I don't think they're primed to have a good week here. I mean, they didn't have I guess they didn't have that great of a week last week. Obviously, just enough to beat you. But I don't know. I always get this bad feeling for Matt Stafford, especially with his inconsistency. That's the big one for me. And especially the Lions as a team. Matt Patricia's having a tough time there in his first shot as head coach, and and that franchise is much maligned anyways. I don't think Stafford's going to have a good week.
Yeah, that's poor Ryan. I know global warming has had his ups and downs with Stafford, so I guess week 3 is break the tie if he plays him. But New England is that's tough to kind of break that tie and have a good week. I can see that as well. I don't know
if the fact that the Patriots rarely play 2 bad games in a row, and not that they played a bad game. They were playing a great Jaguars defense, like we said before. But yeah, I can definitely see them taking their frustration out.
I think so too. I think you're there. And for me, as a fantasy owner, I'm kind of stinker tinkering about putting in the New England defense as opposed to the Rams. But I don't know. Well, that's going to be game time decision. But I got till Sunday afternoon to make up my mind on that. But interesting bus pick. So that kind of concludes the fantasy portion of what we do here at Fourth and Long for week 3, I guess, leading into our second podcast. But Randy, for the viewers at home, NFL game wise, what do you think people should tune into?
Well, I think the Monday Nighter is something to look into. The Pittsburgh Tampa Bay, and the main reason is Tampa Bay, who, like I said, shocked everybody. I was totally shocked at Fitzpatrick. I thought, and I believe I said so on the podcast, that he wouldn't do anything. And probably me saying that is why no one has picked him up on waivers yet. But the fact that, their toughest defensive matchup is now out of the way in Pittsburgh, like I mentioned earlier, is struggling without Shazier. We're struggling, it seems, against everybody, at least on defense. So this could well be a Monday night shootout.
Yeah, interesting.
And I think, will he continue? Will the whole team continue to beat guys deep like that? And does it change the attitude that the coaching staff has when Jameis Winston comes back? Because, if Fitzpatrick has such a hot hand, how could you take him out?
Well, and just so you're aware, waiver wire went through today, and global warming picked up Fitzpatrick. That was the first waiver of the day. So he is off free agency. He is signed to global warming.
But he doesn't listen to me anyway, so.
But no, I agree with you. I think more interesting the fact is, and you just said it, is Winston is sitting out this game, and he can play week 4. But if Fitzpatrick does something against Pittsburgh again, or even has an average day, what do you do there? It's tough, and I think Winston is probably shitting his pants here, thinking, did I just blow an opportunity to be this franchise player? Interesting stat here for you before I kind of move on here. I just came across this actually as we're doing the podcast. Just a tidbit for you for Ryan Fitzmagic, as we call him now. Did you know that he has 181 career passing touchdowns? Do you know the names below him, Randy?
Who's that?
173, Joe Namath. 165, your boy, Troy Aikman. 160, Joe Theismann. 152, Bart Starr. Think about that for a second. Where has Fitzpatrick really played? The Jets and obviously Tampa now, but some interesting when you look back on some of the numbers, how some of these guys who you don't really think about, how they creep up in the stat books.
Well, I think as far as that, quarterbacks tend to get a lot of passing yards and a lot of touchdowns when they're losing games late. And I think especially his time in Buffalo, he spent a lot of time playing catch up.
Yeah.
He's also been around quite a bit. He's kind of a strange case because, like you said, he's got all these touchdowns, which is nice, and that's a lot. But I don't know, he's been one of those guys that's always good enough to make a team, but never good enough to lead a team very far. And if you, I don't have his career record in front of me and all, but I bet it's around 500, maybe less than 500. So he gets these touchdowns, but a lot of it might be garbage time touchdowns. So because he certainly wasn't on teams that won a lot. Well, I don't even know if he's played in a playoff game.
It'd be hard to look back, but just some interesting food for thought there, because you brought up Tampa and the Monday Nighter. For me, we talked about it a couple times, is for me the game I always like watching is New Orleans versus Atlanta. Dome versus dome, gunslinger versus gunslinger. Both have great running backs. Both have decent wide receivers. I think that's going to be a fun one to watch. A more serious game to watch, although most are going to say, really, you're picking that game? Um, but yeah, I am picking that game because I think in week 3, unfortunately, there's a lot on the line here. Giants versus Houston. They're both 0-2. Somebody's going 0-3 unless we go 3 for 3 in ties this week.
Yeah, well, you
But
never know. Anything could happen.
but I think one of those teams going 0-3, your season it could be hard to climb back from. Now, I think that's going to be harder for the Giants to climb back if they're 0-3 as opposed to Houston because Houston's division, let's be honest, sucks. Outside of Jacksonville moving forward, but it's the AFC. There are better opportunities to sneak into a wild card. It is only 2 games, but again, somebody's going 0-3, and I'm curious to see how that finishes for the rest of the season. So for me, that's another game to watch. But I like the game you picked, and we did talk about New England, Detroit too. I think there should be some interesting things there. But yeah, that's there's a lot of good games coming up on the table here. A lot of people are 1-1 that are matching up. So again, you can push forward here and make some noise as opposed to going backwards. So that kind of concludes most of our agenda items for this second podcast edition. Anything else you're on your mind football wise, or anything else you want to say?
No, just to kind of rub in one last time. How about them Cowboys? Boy, they sure played well on Sunday night.
It's you got to get. It pains me to admit these things because now this is being taped and produced. But hats off to the Cowboys. That was a must win for not a must, but you know what I mean. It's a big win in that division to keep them afloat at home against a very tough divisional opponent in the past. I think Dallas is moving in the right direction without a lot of weapons. They did surprise me on how well they did play, but what frustrates me more is the lack of play from the Giants' offensive line. Like you take any quarterback in the league, and they don't have more than 1.5 seconds. It's not very good. There's no protection there for Eli to even utilize those weapons or allow Barkley an opportunity to shine too. Because if the pocket collapses, you're not going to throw and you're not going to run.
And it's a pretty clear signal what your offensive line is doing when your running back is far and away your leading receiver out of the backfield, because that means that Manning can't even look at his guys downfield. He's just got to dump it off right away to save his life, sort of thing.
Yeah, no, so hats off to the Cowboys. They did what they needed to do at home, and they're playing an 0-2 Seattle team. We didn't even talk about that, but we'll see how well that goes. So should be some good games this weekend, but I hope everybody has a good fantasy week. We have a thriller for you Thursday night. The New York Jets versus the Cleveland Browns. Look out, football world. That's gonna be interesting. It would be actually very entertaining, however, if Baker Mayfield was starting and Sam Darnold is obviously starting. That would make it interesting. But as we all know, Mayfield's watching from the sidelines. But I'm interested to see how Darnold does here. He gets an opportunity to control this team. So.
See if he throws another early interception followed by some touchdowns.
Well, hey, as long as you win, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well that's it for this edition of 4th and Long. We look forward to hearing some feedback, and again, good luck to all the GMs out there in 4th and Long this weekend, and hopefully, Randy, best of luck to you. We're not playing each other, so hopefully we can get out of this winless column here. So good luck this weekend, okay?
Yeah, you too, bro.
All right, take care, everybody. Bye.
Have a good week.